Okay, chapter 7. It seems that the worries and wants of a young boy never cease. Now that I had my pups, another obstacle had cropped up. This one looked absolutely impossible. I had to have a coonskin so I could train them. With my 3 little traps and a bulldog determination, I set out to trap Mr. Ringtail. For 3 solid weeks, I practically lived on the river. I tried every trick I knew. It was no use. I just couldn't catch the wily old coons. In desperation, I went to my grandfather. He smiled as he listened to my tale of woe. "Well, we'll have to do something about that," he said. "To train those dogs right, you'll need that coon hide, that's for sure. Now you watch the store while I go over to my tool shed. I'll be right back." So he needed to catch a coon because that way the dogs know what scent to smell for, right? So they have to smell the coon. They have to know what it smells like, what they're actually trying to track. And then that way he can train them to be coon hunters. But he said he's been trying to catch that same coon that he's calling Mr. Ringtail. And it's just, he's too smart and it's just no use, he says. Let's see what Grandpa has in store. Grandpa went to his tool shed. He said, "I'll be right back." After what seemed like an eternity, I saw him coming. He was carrying a brace and bit. That was all. With a mischievous little smile on his face, he said, fix that a little. "You wouldn't think a fellow could catch a coon with this brace and bit, would you?" I thought he was kidding me, and it made me feel bad. "Why, Grandpa," I said, "you couldn't catch a coon in a jillion years with that thing. You just don't have any idea how smart they are." "Yes, you can," he said. "I bet your boots you can. Why, when I was a boy, I caught coons on top of coons with one of those things." So Grandpa's saying, "That's how I caught them." I saw Grandpa was serious and I got interested. He laid the brace down on the counter, picked up a small paper sack, and filled it about half full of horseshoe nails. "Now, you do everything exactly as I tell you," he said, "and you'll catch that coon." Okay, so he picked up a small paper sack, filled it with about half full of horseshoe nails. So let's see what Grandpa's going to do with this sack full of nails, horseshoe nails. "Yes, sir, Grandpa," I said. "I will. I'll do anything to catch one of them." "Now, the first thing you'll need is some bright objects," he said. "The best thing is bright, shiny tin. Cut out some little round pieces, a little smaller than this bit. Do you understand?" I nodded my head. "Now," he said, "you go down along the river where there are a lot of coon tracks. Find a good solid log close by and bore a hole down about 6 inches. Drop one of the bright pieces of tin down in the hole and be sure it's laying right on the bottom." Okay, so he said you have to get some bright pieces of tin. You dig a hole inside of a log about 6 inches down, and then you drop that bright tin inside. And it has to be all the way at the bottom. I was all ears. I didn't want to miss one word my grandfather said. Now and then I would glance at him to see if he was kidding me. So he was still kind of like, wait a second. I have traps that are actually not catching him. And you're telling me that this tin and some nails is going to help me catch him? Let's see. In a serious voice, he went on talking. "Now pay close attention," he said, "because this is the main part of the trap. With eyes as big as hoot owls, I looked and listened." He took 4 of the horseshoe nails from the sack. With the thumb and forefinger of his left hand, he made a small O about the size of the bit, which was 1.5 inches in diameter. "Now, we'll say this is the hole you bored into the log," he said. "About 1 inch apart. Drive these nails in on a slant opposite each other." Holding one of the nails in his right hand, he showed me the right angle. "The ends of the nails will enter the hole about halfway between the top and the piece of tin," he continued, leaving an opening between the sharp points big enough for a coon to get his paw through. He asked me if I understood. Again, I nodded my head and moved a little closer to him. How is that going to catch a coon, Grandpa? I said. It'll catch him all right, he said, and it won't fail. You see, a coon is a curious little animal. Anything that is bright and shiny attracts him. He will reach in and pick it up. When his paw closes on the bright object, it balls up. And when he starts to pull it from the hole, the sharp edges of the nail will gouge into his paw, and he's caught. He looked over at me. Well, what do you think of it? He said. I closed my eyes, and in my mind I could see the funnel-like entrance of the hole and the sharp slanting points of the nails. I could see the coon reaching in for the shiny piece of metal. Naturally, his paw would be much larger when closed than it was when he reached in. It would be impossible for it to pass the sharp nails. Okay, so what Grandpa's saying is the hole is going to be large enough just for the coon to stick his hand in when it's flat. But then when he closes his fist to grab the shiny object, the shiny tin that Billy's going to put in the bottom of the hole, then it's not going to come back out because the nails are going to be poking him. So the only way for him to get his hand out is to open his hand, but he wants that tin. So he'll be caught because he doesn't want to let go. It was all looking pretty good to me, and I was on the point of saying so when it hit me. Why, all the coon had to do was open his paw, drop the object, and he was free. It all blew up then and there. I just knew my grandfather was playing a joke on me. I stepped back and almost cried as I said, Grandpa, you're kidding me. That kind of a trap couldn't catch a coon. Why, all he'd have to do is open his paw, drop the piece of tin, and he could pull it from the hole. Grandpa started roaring with laughter. This did make me feel bad. With tears in my eyes, I started for the door. Wait a minute, Grandpa said. I'm not kidding you. Oh, I know I like to have my jokes, same as any man, but I meant every word I said. So, Billy really wants to catch this coon, and he thought Grandpa was just being silly and just like telling him this whole story of how to catch a coon and wasting his time just to mess with him when he knows Billy's really serious. So he was getting really upset, and Grandpa said, no, I'm not kidding. I'm really serious. I mean everything I just told you. I turned around and looked at him. He had stopped laughing, and there was a hurt expression on his face. I wasn't laughing at you, he said. I was laughing more at myself than you. I just wanted to see if you were smart enough to see if there was a way the coon could free himself. A fellow wouldn't have to be very smart to see that, I said. Grandpa started talking seriously again. You know, he said, a coon has more than one peculiarity about him. When I was a boy, I had a pet coon. By watching him, I saw and learned a lot of things. Okay, so Grandpa's saying he had a pet coon, and that's how he knows a bunch of things about coons. He had a den in an old hollow tree in our front yard. So that's where he lived. There was a hollow tree. Hollow tree just means that it's complete. There's nothing on the inside. So he would, so that's where the coon would live. I don't know the number of times I had to climb that tree and get my mother's scissors, buttons, needles, and thimble from his den. Why, he'd even carry out our knives, forks, and spoons. Anything that was bright and shiny, he took to his den. Grandpa stopped talking for a few minutes. I could see a faraway look in his eyes. Once again, he was living in those long ago days. I waited in silence for him to go on with his story. One of the most peculiar things about that coon, he said, was his front feet. Once he wrapped those little paws around something, he would never let go. My mother had an old churn. It was one of those kinds with a small hole in the lid for the dasher. When she would get through churning, she would take the dasher out to wash it. Okay, so a churn was where they churned butter. So they would put milk inside of it, and there would be kind of like a stirring stick, and this churn, the mom that he's saying, Billy's grandpa saying his mom had, was the entrance for the stick. The little hole to get inside was very small, but then the inside, it was way bigger on the inside because that's where all the butter was being churned. And then, so he said, that crazy coon would climb up to the top of the churn, poke his little front paw through the hole and get a fistful of butter. The hole was small, and when he closed his paw, he couldn't get it back out. All he had to do was open it, drop the butter, and he would be free. But do you think he would? No, sir. He would carry that churn lid all over the house, squalling and growling, while it took everyone in the house to free him. I'd have to wrap him up in a gunny sack or an old coat and pry his claws loose from the butter. Seeing this time after time is what gave me the idea for this trap. Once he reaches in and gets a hold of that tin, he's caught, because he will never open his paw. Okay, so Grandpa's saying it's going to work because he's just going to want to keep that tin, and he's not going to want to open his paw because he saw it with a pet coon that he had when he was a young boy, and that's how he even came up with this. With my confidence restored, it all sounded pretty good to me, and I was anxious to try out this wonderful plan. I thanked him, and taking the brace and nails, I left the store. By the time I reached home, it was too late in the day to start making my traps. That night, I talked the idea over with Papa. I've heard of coons being caught that way, he said, but I never paid much attention to it. Your grandfather should know, though, for he was quite a coon hunter when he was a boy. From what he told me, I said, it never fails. Okay. So that's what Dad said. He was talking to Papa about this trap, and he said, your grandfather was a really good coon hunter, and so I would still try it. Papa asked if I wanted him to help make my traps. No, I said, I think I can do it myself. I didn't sleep too well that night. I bored holes, drove nails, and fought coons practically all night. So that's all he was thinking about. So that's why he's saying he did it, because that's all he was thinking about all night long and couldn't sleep. Early the next morning, I went to the trash pile. As I stirred around in the rusty old cans, I thought of another time I had searched for a can. Finally, I found the one I wanted. It was bright and shiny. Everything was going along just fine until Mama caught me cutting out the circles of tin with her scissors. Uh-oh. If you cut out a metal little tin can with scissors, are the scissors going to get damaged? Yes, they are. So everything was going fine until he took Mom's scissors and started doing that. I always swore she could find the biggest witches of any woman in the Ozarks. That time she overdid it. I was almost to the river before the stinging stopped. So Mom took a little branch and gave him a little kind of hit his legs or something with it, so that he wouldn't be using her scissors anymore. And he said it was stinging him until he went almost to the river, and he had to walk all the way to the river to start doing his trap. And it didn't stop hurting until he got to the river. It wasn't hard to find places for my traps. All along the river, large sycamore logs lay partly submerged in the clear blue water. On one, where I could see the muddy little tracks of the ringtails, I bored a hole, dropped in a piece of tin, and drove my nails. On down the river I went, making my traps. I stopped when I ran out of nails. Altogether, I had 14 traps. That night, Papa asked me how I was making out. Oh, all right, he said. I've got 14 of them made. He laughed and said, well, you can't ever tell. You may catch one. The next morning, I was up with the chickens. So chickens wake up early, so he's up with them. I took my pups with me, as I just knew I'd have a big ringtail trapped, and I wanted them to see it. I was a disappointed boy when I peeked out of a canebrake at my last trap and didn't see a coon. All the way home, I tried to figure out what I'd done wrong. So maybe it's not that he did anything wrong. It could be that he just needs to be more patient and wait. Can't just right away catch something, right? I went to Papa. He put his thinking cap on and thought the situation over. Maybe you left too much scent around when you made those traps, he said. If you did, it'll take a while for it to go away. Now, I wouldn't get too impatient. I'm pretty sure you'll catch one sooner or later. Oh, that's smart. Because if the coons smell that humans were there, maybe they're a little less willing to go over there. Papa's word perked me up just like air does a deflated inner tube. He was right. I'd simply left too much scent around my traps. All I had to do was wait until it disappeared, and I'd have my coon hide. Okay, so he really liked that Papa said that. He's like, oh, that makes sense. Morning after morning, it was the same old disappointment. No coon. When a week had gone by and still no results from my traps, I gave up. What little patience I had was completely gone. I was firmly convinced that coons didn't walk on sycamore logs anymore, and bright shiny objects had about as much effects on them as a coon hound would. So he was starting to say, oh, I guess like coons usually love to walk on logs, but I guess they stopped doing that. And he just lost hope that he would ever catch a coon. One morning, I didn't get up to run my trap line. I stayed in bed. What was the use? It was just a waste of time. When the family sat down to breakfast, I heard my oldest sister say, Mama, isn't Billy going to get up for breakfast? Why, is he in his room, Mama asked. I didn't know. I thought he was down looking at his traps. I heard Papa say, I'll go wake him up. He came to the door and said, You better get up, Billy. Breakfast is ready. I don't want breakfast, I said. I'm not hungry. Papa took one look at me and saw I had a bad case of the ringtail blues. He came over and sat down on the bed. What's the matter, he said. You having coon trouble? Grandpa lied to me, Papa. I said, I should have known better. Whoever heard of catching a coon with a brace and bit and a few horseshoe nails? Okay, well that doesn't mean Grandpa lied. It could be that you just have to be patient, Billy. I wouldn't say that, Papa said. I don't think your grandpa deliberately lied to you. Besides, I've heard of coons being caught that way. Well, I don't think I've done anything wrong, I said. I've done everything exactly as he said, and I haven't caught one yet. I still think it's that scent, Papa said. You know, someone told me, or I read it somewhere, that it takes about a week for scent to die away. How long has it been since you made those traps? It's been over a week, I said. Well, the way I figure, it's about time for you to catch one. Yes, sir. I wouldn't be surprised if you came in with one any day now. After Papa had left the room, I lay thinking of what he had said, any day now. I got up and hurried into my clothes. As soon as I was finished with breakfast, I called my pups and lit out for the river. So he was excited now because Papa's like, usually it takes about a week. He said, it's been over a week. He said, oh, any day now then. Probably going to catch one any day now. So he's excited. He wants to go check his traps now. The first trap was empty, so was the second one. That old feeling of doubt came over me again. I thought, it's no use, I'll never catch one, and I so need the skin to train my pups. On the way to my third trap, I had to walk through a thick stand of wild cane. It was tough going, and my pups started whimpering. I stopped and picked them up. We'll be out of this in a few minutes, I said. Then you'll be all right. I came plowing out of the matted mass and was right on the trap before I realized it. I was met by a loud squall. I was so surprised I dropped the pups. There he was, my first coon. So he finally caught him. He was humped up on the sycamore log, growling and showing his teeth. He kept jerking his front paw, which was jammed deep in the hole I had bored. He was trapped by his own curiosity. So he wouldn't open up his fist so he could get out. I couldn't move and I felt like my wind had been cut off. I kept hearing a noise but couldn't make out what it was. The movement of the boy pup shook me from my trance. The unidentified sound was his bawling. He was trying to climb up to the log and get to the coon. I yelled at him and darted in to get hold of his collar. On seeing my movement, the coon let out another squall. It scared me half to death. I froze in my tracks and started yelling again at my pup. So the boy was just like going after the coon. He's ready. The girl pup worked around behind the coon and climbed up on the log. I screamed at her. She paid no attention to me. Digging his sharp little claws in the bark, the boy pup made it to the top. He didn't hesitate. Straight down that sycamore log he charged. With his teeth bared, the coon waited. Okay, so the reason that Billy is trying to stop them is because they're still little puppies. He wants them to get a little stronger, probably, right? When my pup was about 2 feet from him, he made a lunge. The coon just seemed to pull my pup up under his stomach and went to work with tooth and claw. The girl pup saved him. Like a cat in a corn crib, she sneaked up from behind and sank her needle-sharp teeth in the coon's back. So the pups are working together. It was too much for old Ringy. He turned the boy pup loose, turned around and slapped her clear off the log. She came running to me, yelping her head off. I grabbed her up in my arms and looked for the boy pup. When the coon had turned him loose, he too had fallen off the log. He was trying to get back to the coon. I darted in and grabbed him by the hind leg. Okay, so the puppies are just going crazy after the coon. They're ready to hunt, but they're still kind of little, so the coon is kind of attacking them and getting the best of them. With a pup under each arm and running as fast as with a pup under each arm and running as fast as I could, I lit out for the house. Coming out of the bottoms into a fresh plowed field, I set my pups down so I could get a little more speed. I started yelling as soon as I came in the sight of the house. Mama came out flying with my sisters right behind her. Papa was out by the barn harnessing his team. Mama yelled something to him about a snake. He dropped the harness, jumped over the rail fence, and in a long lope started for me. Mama reached me first. She grabbed me and shouted, "Where did it bite you?" So Mama thought he had gotten bitten by a snake. "Bite me?" I said. "Why, Mama, I'm not bit. I've got him, Mama, I've got him." "Got what?" Mama asked. "A big coon," I said, "the biggest one in the river bottoms. He's this big, Mama." I made a circle with my arms as big as a 20-gallon keg. Mama just groaned way deep down and covered her face with her hands. Some big tears squeezed out between her fingers. Almost in a whimper, I heard her say, "Thank God, I thought you were snake bitten." My sister, seeing Mama cry, puckered up and started bawling. "He needs a whipping," the oldest one said. "That's what he needs, scaring Mama that way." Something busted loose inside me and I cried a little too. "I didn't mean to scare Mama," I sniffled. "I just wanted everyone to know I caught a coon." Up until this time, Papa hadn't said a word. He just stood looking on. "Here now," he said. "Let's have none of this crying." He didn't mean to scare anyone. Taking his handkerchief from his pocket, he stepped over to Mama, put his arm around her, and started drying her eyes. Mama poked her head around him and glared at me. "Billy Coleman," she shouted, "if you ever scare me like that again, I'll take a switch and wear you to a frazzle." This hurt my feelings, and I really did get tuned up. "Everyone's mad at me," I said, "and I haven't done anything but catch the biggest coon on the river." Mama came over. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to be cross, but you did scare me. I thought a rattlesnake had bitten you." So Mama got upset with him because she was so scared because she loves her kids, right? And sometimes when kids scare you and you think something really bad happened to them, you're just like so terrified that you're just like, "Oh my gosh, you need to get punished or something for scaring me that bad." But then Mama said sorry. And she said, "You did scare me though." "Now that that's settled," Papa said, "we had better go get that coon." Looking at Mama, he said, "Why don't you and the girls go with us? I don't think it'll take that long." Mama looked at me, smiled, and turned to the girls. "Would you like to go?" she said. Their only answer was a lot of squealing and jumping up and down. On the way, Mama noticed some blood on my shirt. She stopped me and started looking me over. "Where did that come from?" she said. "Did that coon bite you?" "No, Mama," I said. "I didn't get close enough for him to bite me." With a worried look on her face, she jerked out my shirt. "You don't seem to be scratched anywhere," she said. "Maybe this is where it came from," Papa said. He reached down and picked up my boy pup. His little black nose was split wide open and was bleeding. I saw a relieved look come over Mama's face. Looking at me, she started shaking her head. "I don't know," she said. "I just don't know." "Did that coon get a hold of this pup?" Papa said. "He sure did, Papa," I said. "But it wasn't the coon's fault. If it hadn't been for little Ann, he'd have eaten him up." I told how my dogs had tied into the coon. Papa laughed as he fondled my pup. "This dog is going to be a coonhound," he said, "and I mean a good one." So Papa's pretty much saying like, "Oh my gosh," like Mom got scared and she thought, "Whoa, did Billy get hurt? Is he bleeding?" But then when they saw it was the dog, and Billy told Papa how the dogs just went after him, especially the boy dog, then Papa said, "Wow, this is going to be a good coonhound." The coon started squalling as soon as we came in sight. "My goodness," Mama said, "you wouldn't think anything so small would be so vicious." Papa picked up a club. "Now everybody stand back out of the way," he said. "This won't take long." My pups were wanting to get to the coon so badly that they were hard to hold. I had to squeeze them up tight to keep them from jumping right out of my arms. My sisters, with eyes as big as blue marbles, got behind Mama and peeked around her. Papa whacked the coon a good one across the head. He let out a small gnaw, growled, and showed his teeth. He tried hard to get to Papa, but the trap held him. The girls buried their faces in Mama's dress and started bawling. Mama turned her back to the fight. I heard her say, "I wish we hadn't come, poor thing." Papa whacked him again, and it was all over. It was too much for Mama and the girls. They left. I heard the tall cane rattling as they ran for the house. After the coon was killed, I walked over. Papa was trying to get the coon's paw from the trap. He couldn't do it. Taking a pair of pliers from his pocket, he said, "It's a good thing I had these along, or we would have had to cut his foot off." So the mom and the girls came, but they should have stayed home because They didn't want to see the coon get killed, but that's why they're hunters, okay? So back in the day, that's what you had to do, and they're still hunters today too. After Papa had pulled the nails, he lifted the coon's paw from the hole. There, clamped firmly in it, was the bright piece of tin. Oh my goodness. In a low voice, Papa said, well, I'll be darned. All he had to do was open it up and he was free, but he wouldn't do it. Your grandfather was right. A sorrowful look came over Papa's face as he ran his fingers through the soft yellow hair. Billy, he said, I want you to take a hammer and pull the nails from every one of those traps. It's summertime now and their fur isn't any good. Besides, I don't think this is very sportsmanlike. The coon doesn't have a chance. It's all right this time. You needed this one. But from now on, I want you to catch them with your dogs. That way, they have a 50-50 chance. So Papa said that in summertime, the coon's fur isn't valuable, so you can't even sell them. And so he told him, take apart all of your traps that you set, all 14 of them. I want them all taken apart because we can't even sell the fur. And the coon, it's kind of like cheating to trap him this way because he doesn't have a chance. So he wants them to have a 50-50 chance of getting away with the dogs. I will, Papa said. I said, that's what I intended to do. While we were skinning the coon, Papa asked me when I was going to start training my dogs. I don't know, I said. Do you think they're too young? No, I don't think so, he said. I've heard that the younger they are, the better it is. Well, in that case, I said, I'll start tomorrow. With the help of my oldest sister, we started giving my pups their first lessons. She would hold their collars while I made trails with the hide for them to follow. I'd climb trees that leaned out over the river, jump out into the water, swim to the other side, and make trails up and down the bank. With a long pole and wire, I dragged the hide on top of rail fences, swing it through the air, and let it touch the ground 20 or 30 feet away. I did everything with that hide a coon could do, and probably a lot of things a coon couldn't do. It was a beautiful sight to see my pups work those trails. At first they were awkward and didn't know what to do, but they would never quit trying. So he took the coon hide that he had, right? After he killed that coon and caught it, he was just pulling it all over everywhere so that dogs could know when they're going to hunt coons, they have to look for that smell. So the coon hide would leave a scent and the pups would look for it. Old Dan would get so eager and excited he would overrun a trail. Where it twisted or turned, he would run straight on, balling up a storm. It didn't take him long to realize that a smart old coon doesn't always run in a straight line. Little Ann never overran a trail. She would wiggle and twist, cry and whine, and pretty soon she would figure it out. Okay, so old Dan would just start running, and then he would lose the scent. Little Ann would never just go run straight. She would take a really long time, but she would still figure out where to go. At first they were afraid of water. I would never admit it, even to myself. I always said they just didn't like to get wet. They would follow the trail to the seam and stop. Sitting down on their rears, they would cry and beg for help. With a pup under each arm, I'd wade out into the stream and set them down in the cool water. 9 times out of 10, one pup would swim one way and the other one would just go the opposite way. I had a time with this part of their training, but my persistence had no bounds. So they didn't like the water. So if a coon went in the water, if Billy put the coon hide in the water, then put it to the other side of the water, then they weren't willing to go over there because they didn't want to get in the water. So Billy really had to work with them to get in the water. It wasn't long until they loved the water. Old Dan would jump out as far as he could and practically knock the river dry. Little Ann would ease herself in and swim like a muskrat for the opposite shore. So then they started loving the water, see? I taught my dogs every trick I knew and any new ones I heard about. I taught them how to split up on a riverbank to search for the hidden trail because it was impossible to tell where a coon could come out of the river. Sometimes he might swim downstream and other times he might swim upstream. Maybe he would come back to the bank he had just left, or he would cross over to the other side. Perhaps he would stop in the middle of the stream on an old drift. Sometimes he would come out of the water by catching the dangling limbs of a leaning birch and climbing up, never touching the bank, or he would come out on the same trail he used to go in and backtrack. He would sometimes crawl up under an undermined bank or into an old muskrat den. Okay, so that's how the boy dog would swim. One of the favorite tricks of a smart old ringtail is the tree barking trick. This he accomplished by running far up. On the side of a tree and using his stout legs for leverage, springing them 20 or 30 feet away before touching the ground. Okay, so these were tricks that the ringtail coons would do. And so he was teaching his dogs all of that. Dumb hounds trail up the tree and start bawling tread. I taught my dogs to circle for a good 100 yards to be sure he was still in the tree before bawling. Okay, so he said dogs don't know any better, because sometimes the smart ringtails, he runs, okay, springing, okay, before touching the ground. So you have to make sure that he's actually in the tree before they started to bawl, because sometimes the ringtail will just go up the tree, but then he'll go ahead and start running away anyway. So sometimes you think they're there, but they're not. In order to learn more about coon hunting, I'd hang around my grandfather's store and listen to the stories told by the coon hunters. Some of the tales I heard were long and tall, but I believed them all. So he said some of them were probably exaggerated because the hunters were trying to make their stories sound more exciting than they actually were, but Billy still believed all of them. I could always tell when Grandpa was kidding me by the twinkle in his eyes. He told me how a coon could climb right up the fog and disappear in the stars, and how he could leap on a horse's back and run him over your dogs. I didn't care, for I loved to hear the tall tales. Anything that had a coon hair in it, I believed completely. So tall tales is when it's they're tales that people say are exaggerated or not even true. Okay. All through that summer and into the late fall, the training went on. Although I was worn down to a frazzle, I was a happy boy. I figured I was ready for the ringtails. So he was ready to start hunting, he said. Late one evening, tired and exhausted, I sat down by a big sycamore and called my dogs to me. It's all over, I said. There'll be no more lessons. I've worked hard and I've done my best. From now on, it's all up to you. Hunting season is just a few days away, and I'm going to let you rest, for I want you to be in good shape the night it opens. So he said, that's it. We're done training. You guys are ready to start hunting, and hunting season is about to start in a few days. It was wonderful indeed how I could have heart-to-heart talks with my dogs, and they always seemed to understand. Each question I asked was answered in their own doggish way. Although they couldn't talk in my terms, they had a language of their own that was easy to understand. Sometimes I would see the answer in their eyes, and again it would be in the friendly wagging of their tails. Other times I could hear the answer in a low whine, or feel it in the soft caresses of a warm flicking tongue. In some way, they would always answer. And that's the end of that chapter. They're ready to start hunting.